How could you let this happen? You assured me these supports were secure. Look at this mess.
The day they bulldozed my great-grandfather's bridge was the day I decided to turn their $4 million lakefront resort into a muddy parking lot. It's 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. I'm sipping coffee on my dock, the steam rising against the cool morning mist of the Texas Hill Country. The air usually smells like pine needles and damp earth, but today, it smells like diesel fumes and impending disaster. Through the fog, I see it. A massive yellow bulldozer rolling toward the stone arch bridge my great-grandfather, Samuel Morrison, built with his own hands in 1923. This isn't just a pile of rocks. That bridge is the artery of our community. It has connected the east and west banks for 100 years, surviving floods, droughts, and 3 different wars. But apparently couldn't survive Linda Prescott. Linda is the newly elected president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, a woman who wears pearls to check her mail and drives a pristine white BMW SUV that has never touched a speck of mud. To Linda, my family's bridge, hand-cut limestone, weathered by a century of history, is an eyesore. It doesn't match the modern Mediterranean aesthetic of the luxury resort being built on the opposite shore. But here's what Linda and her fancy board of directors didn't know about Texas water law. My great-grandfather didn't just build that bridge to cross the water. He built it to control the dam. And I just inherited something far more dangerous than any HOA bylaw. The absolute legal right to drain their entire lake. My name is Jake Morrison. I'm a civil engineer, and 3 months ago, I inherited the most beautiful piece of lakefront property you've ever seen. Samuel Morrison built our family cabin back in 1920, right after he returned from the Great War. He wasn't a rich man, but he was a genius with stone and water. The bridge was his masterpiece. He quarried the limestone himself, fitting the blocks together with such precision that you can't slide a credit card between them even today. For decades, that bridge served everyone. Fishermen heading to the deep channels, kids sprinting across to the swimming holes, neighbors helping neighbors during storm season. It was the beating heart of this place. When I moved back here with my wife, Sarah, we had simple dreams. We'd been saving every penny, planning to escape the city grind. I'd fix up the cabin, maybe do some consulting work from home, and spend my mornings fishing off that old wooden dock. The creak of those weathered planks under my boots felt like coming home. We wanted peace. We wanted a quiet life. Then, the Whispering Pines development sprouted up on the other side of the lake like a toxic fungus. It started subtly. The trees were cleared. Massive, gaudy mansions began to rise, blocking the sunset. Then came the luxury resort announcement. A $4 million project promising a marina, a lakeside bistro, and an exclusive club for the new residents. And finally, Linda. I should have seen the trouble coming when I got that first certified letter. You know the kind. The envelope has a specific weight to it, a texture that screams lawsuit, before you even slide your finger under the flap. Inside was Linda's sweetest stationery, heavy cream paper with gold embossing, declaring that my bridge violated community architectural standards and posed a visual nuisance. I laughed. I actually stood in my kitchen and laughed out loud. My bridge was built when her development was still a cow pasture. I tossed a letter on the counter, thinking it was a joke. But Linda had done her homework, or thought she had. The letter cited HOA Covenant number 47B regarding unapproved external structures, and threatened me with fines of $500 a day if I didn't present a demolition plan within 30 days. $500 a day? Sarah asked, reading over my shoulder, her face pale. Jake, that's more than our mortgage. It's a bluff, I assured her, pouring another cup of coffee. We aren't even part of their HOA. Our deed predates their entire organization by 80 years. I was confident. I was arrogant. I thought being right was enough. I didn't realize that for people like Linda, facts are just obstacles to be bulldozed. I grabbed my grandfather's old deed box from the attic, musty papers that smelled of dust and time, and found the original survey maps. My property line extended well past the bridge. I was grandfathered in, bulletproof, or so I thought. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting to clear this up. I walked into community center, a sterile building smelling of floor wax and stale donuts. The room was packed with a new money crowd, people who had moved here in the last 2 years, wearing designer athleisure wear and looking at me like I was a hired help. Linda sat at the head table, flanked by her sycophants. Mr. Morrison, she said, her smile not reaching her cold, dead eyes. We didn't expect you to attend. Do you have a demolition schedule? I spread my documents on a folding table like a winning poker hand. Linda, ladies and gentlemen, there's been a misunderstanding. My property is exempt from HOA jurisdiction under the grandfather clause of 1955. The bridge stays. Linda didn't even glance at the papers. She just sighed, a long, theatrical sound of pity. Times change, Mr. Morrison. Progress requires sacrifice. We are building a world-class community here, and that pile of rocks is dragging down property values. The board has already voted. Enforcement begins next week. You can't enforce rules on property you don't govern, I said, my voice rising. Oh, but we can, she replied, her voice sickeningly sweet. We petitioned the county to annex the access road last month. Your driveway connects to our road now. That brings you under our architectural purview for all road-facing structures. Welcome to the neighborhood, Jake. I stood there, stunned. They had rezoned the road behind my back. As I walked out to my beat-up pickup truck, the gravel crunching under my boots, I realized this wasn't about architecture. Linda looked at my humble cabin, my truck, my working-class roots, and decided I didn't belong in her vision of paradise. She wanted me gone, and she had just declared war. The war didn't start with explosions. It started with paper cuts. 3 days after that disastrous board meeting, I was heading out of work when I spotted a white sedan parked at the edge of my property line. 2 men in matching polo shirts were standing there, taking photos of my grass. Morning, gentlemen. I called out, gripping my travel mug a little too tightly. Can I help you? The older one, built like a retired linebacker who'd spent too much time at the buffet, smirked. He tapped a clipboard. HOA compliance patrol, sir. We're documenting violations. I nearly choked on my coffee. Violations? I haven't even had breakfast yet. Grass height exceeds the HOA standard of 3 inches in multiple quadrants, he droned, reading from checklist. Dock requires repainting to match the community palette. Beige sand or oyster white. Your current wood finish is non-compliant. Also, that storage shed, it needs pressure washing. And the fishing net visible from the street, that's a Class C violation. They weren't just inspecting, they were hunting. Over the next 2 weeks, these clowns wrote me up for everything short breathing too loud. My mailbox was apparently the wrong shade of matte black. My welcome mat was non-compliant sizing. They even cited me for having a commercial vehicle in the driveway, my own pickup truck, because it had a toolbox and a bed. By week 3, I was staring at $1,200 in fines. Sarah was trying to stay brave, but I could see the stress eating at her. She stopped waving to neighbors. She started checking the mailbox with dread. We can't afford this, Jake, she whispered one night over a dinner of leftovers. Maybe we should just sell? The developer made an offer last year. That's what they want, Sarah, I said, slamming my hand on the table softer than I intended. They want to bleed us dry, so we sell cheap. I'm not letting Linda Prescott steal my family's legacy. That night, I did what any good engineer does when faced with systemic failure. I investigated the system. I started digging into the companies Linda was using. The security firm, Eagle Eye Protection, seemed to be everywhere. And the landscaping company she kept recommending to fix my violations? Green Horizon Services. I pulled the public records on the Texas Secretary of State website. It took me about 4 hours of cross-referencing LLCs, but then I found it. The registered agent for Eagle Eye Protection was a man named Richard Prescott, Linda's husband, and Green Horizon Services, owned by a holding company registered to Linda's brother-in-law. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating the dark room. Linda wasn't just a power-tripping Karen. She was running a racket. The HOA was paying her husband's company $3,000 a month to harass homeowners into compliance, and then forcing those homeowners to pay her brother-in-law to fix the problems. It was a closed loop of corruption. But I needed more than just a conflict of interest. I needed leverage. I went to the state contractor licensing board website. I punched in Rick Prescott's name. The search bar spun for a second and then delivered the first golden nugget of this entire saga. Status expired. Expiration date 18 months ago. Rick Prescott had been operating a private security firm without a valid license for over a year. In Texas, that's not just an oversight. It's a criminal offense. Operating an unlicensed security company is a Class A misdemeanor, and every single fine they had issued was legally void. Knowledge nugget for you guys watching. Always check the credentials of anyone the HOA sends to your property. In many states, security and compliance officers must be licensed by the State Department of Public Safety. If they aren't, they're just trespassers in polo shirts. But I wasn't done. I called a buddy of mine, Mike, who does commercial code inspections. I asked him for a favor. Mike, bring your laser measure and your code book. We're going for a walk. We waited until Linda left for her Saturday morning Pilates class. From the public road, Mike and I took a very close look at the Prescott residence. It was a McMansion of the highest order. Faux columns, excessive gables, the works. Mike started pointing things out immediately. See that deck extension? Mike asked, squinting. No permit stickers visible. And looking at the support beams, that's not up to load-bearing code. Keep going, I said, taking notes. Her pool house, Mike pointed. It's built 6 inches over the setback line. And that fancy Japanese garden she's so proud of, according to the GIS map on my phone, she's encroaching 3 feet onto the community green belt. Linda had been trespassing on HOA common land for 3 years, while fining me for my grass being half an inch too long. The hypocrisy was so thick I could taste it. The next Monday, I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I simply filed 3 anonymous complaints with the County Code Enforcement Office and sent a certified letter to the State Licensing Board regarding Rick's expired security license. I sat back and waited. The reaction was immediate. Within a week, the security patrols vanished. I heard rumors at the hardware store that Rick was scrambling to pay back fees and fines. Linda looked frazzled. Her perfect hair was a little less perfect, but I had poked the bear, and the bear was about to swipe back harder than I expected. I came home one evening to find a drone hovering over my backyard. Not a toy, a professional camera drone. Linda wasn't just finding me anymore. She was building a dossier. And then the whisper started. Sarah came home in tears because Mrs. Patterson at the bakery refused to serve her. She said we're bad elements. Jake. She said we're bringing crime to the neighborhood. Linda was assassinating our character. She had convinced half the town that I was some kind of unstable, dangerous squatter. I realized then that finding her husband's expired license was just a jab. If I wanted to win this, I needed a knockout punch. I needed to find the one thing Linda cared about more than her reputation, her money. And the key to that lay in the one place she never thought to look, under the water. The escalation came swiftly. Linda wasn't going to let a little thing like her husband's illegal security firm stop her. She pivoted. If she couldn't find me into submission, she would regulate me out of existence using safety as a weapon. I'm sitting in my home office, staring at a C80 drawing, when I hear heavy trucks pulling up, not the usual delivery vans, but county vehicles. A man in a hard hat, carrying the clipboard that ruins dreams, steps out. Jake Morrison? He asks, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. That's me. I'm from the County Building Safety Division. We received an anonymous tip about structural instability concerning your bridge. I'm here to conduct a mandatory safety evaluation. Anonymous tip, I repeated, scanning the trees. I could practically smell Linda's perfume wafting from across the lake. Let me guess, the tipster was concerned about catastrophic collapse. Something like that, the inspector muttered. The inspection took 4 hours. This poor guy crawled over every inch of my great-grandfather's stonework. He used calipers, moisture meters, and a rebound hammer. I wasn't worried. Samuel Morrison built that bridge to hold 1920s logging trucks loaded with timber. A modern SUV is a feather compared to that. When he finished, the inspector wiped sweat from his forehead and looked actually impressed. Mr. Morrison, honestly, this bridge is solid as a rock. It's built better than most of the county roads I drive on. I smiled. So we're good. Well, he hesitated, consulting his checklist. Technically, yes, but current code requires seismic reinforcement for any masonry structure spanning a waterway of this width. Since we've done a formal inspection, I can't ignore it. You're in a Zone 1 seismic area. Seismic area? I laughed. This is Central Texas. The biggest earthquake we've ever had was when the quarry blasted a hole for the highway. I know, he sighed. But the code is the code. You have 10 days to submit a retrofit plan, or we have to condemn it. Estimated cost usually runs about $3,000 to $4,000. Then, he handed me a business card along with a citation. This was the kicker. You might want to call this guy. He's the only certified seismic retrofit specialist in the immediate area. He usually handles these HOA compliance issues pretty fast. I took the card. Prescott Construction Solutions. I stared at the card. Rick Prescott. Linda's husband again. He was the only specialist? I did a quick search on my phone right there in the driveway. Rick Prescott had given himself a seismic certification from an online course that took 4 hours to complete. I decided to play along. I called Rick. He showed up the next day, smug as a Cheshire cat, wearing a brand new safety vest that still had creases in it. He barely looked at the bridge. Yeah, it's a mess, Jake, Rick said, shaking his head theatrically. Ancient mortar. No rebar. This is a death trap. To bring this up to code, I'm looking at $12,000. Maybe 15 if we hit bedrock issues. 12,000. I asked, keeping my voice even. The inspector said 3. Supply chain issues, buddy, Rick smirked. Concrete's expensive. But hey, if you can't afford it, the HOA has a removal program. We can demo it for you for a flat fee of $5,000. Put on a payment plan. There it was. The squeeze. Pay them $15,000 to fix a problem they invented, or pay them $5,000 to destroy my heritage. Linda and Rick were running a protection racket disguised as a neighborhood association. I told Rick I'd think about it. As soon as he drove off, I called my buddy Mike again. Mike, I need the actual seismic code for our county. Subsection C. Mike called back 10 minutes later. Jake, you're gonna love this. The seismic requirement only applies to new construction or major renovations exceeding 50% of property value. Existing structures are grandfathered, and unless there is visible cracking greater than a 1/4 inch. There were no cracks. The citation was bogus. The inspector had likely been pressured or paid to cite a code that didn't apply. But I realized that fighting this ticket by ticket was a losing game. They would just invent something else next week. I needed to cut the head off the snake. I needed to understand why they were so obsessed with my bridge specifically. It wasn't just aesthetics. Linda was too greedy for that. I went back to the attic. I dug deeper into boxes. I found the original survey maps again, but this time I looked at the water, not the land. I found a tube of blue line blueprints labeled Lake Morrison Flow Control and Dam Operations 1923. I unrolled them on the kitchen table, weighing the corners down with coffee mugs. The drawings were intricate, beautiful pieces of engineering art. They showed the main dam, the spillway, and the bypass channels. My eyes widened. The bridge wasn't just a bridge. The limestone arches were actually housing for the secondary spillway gates. My great-grandfather hadn't just built a crossing. He had built the emergency release valve for the entire lake. And then I saw the document that changed everything. A yellowed piece of paper with a state seal, Deed of Water Rights and Flow Management Authority. It was explicitly clear. The owner of the Morrison homestead retained sole and exclusive authority to manage water levels for flood control and maintenance. These rights were never transferred to the county. They were never transferred to the HOA. They belonged to the land. They belonged to me. I sat there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, and felt a cold smile spread across my face. Linda was worried about the architectural style of my bridge. She had no idea she was trying to demolish the control room for her entire lake. While I was studying the blueprints, my phone buzzed. It was an email from the HOA board. Subject: Emergency Community Meeting. Agenda: Vote to authorize immediate removal of hazardous structure, Morrison Bridge. They weren't waiting for the 10 days. They were accelerating the timeline. Linda was going for the kill. I looked at the blueprints, then at the email. Okay, Linda, I whispered. You want a meeting? Let's have a meeting. The emergency meeting was held on a Thursday night, designed specifically to ensure working people couldn't attend. But the room was packed. Linda had mobilized her army. The atmosphere in the community center was toxic. It felt less like a neighborhood gathering and more like a public execution. I walked in carrying a banker's box full of documents. The murmurs stopped instantly. People I use a barbecue with looked at their feet. Linda sat at the front, flanked by Rick and a man in a tailored suit I didn't recognize. Mr. Morrison, Linda announced, her voice echoing through the microphone. We didn't think you'd show. This meeting is to address the immediate safety crisis your bridge represents. Crisis? I said, setting the heavy box on the table with a loud thud. The only crisis here is the manufacturing of false evidence. We have a report, Linda said, waving a piece of paper, from a structural engineer stating the bridge is at risk of catastrophic failure. She gestured to the man in the suit. He stood up. Hi, I'm Brad. I'm a structural consultant. Based on the age of the materials, the probability of collapse is 85%. Have you inspected the bridge, Brad? I asked loudly. I've seen the photos, Brad stammered. So you haven't touched it. You haven't run a load test. You're guessing based on photos provided by the person paying your fee. I turned to the room. This is a sham. My bridge has stood for a century. This is about power and it's about money. That's enough. Linda shrieked, slamming her gavel. We are voting, all in favor of immediate removal to protect community safety. The hands went up. It was a slaughter. The vote was 7-1. The only dissenting vote was Mrs. Chun, an 80-year-old widow who had lived here since the 60s. She looked at me with sad eyes and mouthed, I'm sorry. Motion passes, Linda beamed, the thrill of victory flushing her cheeks. Contractors will begin demolition tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. The cost of $15,000 will be added to your property lien. If you interfere, the sheriff will be called. $15,000 to destroy my family's legacy, I said quietly. Progress is expensive, Jake. Linda sneered. Maybe you should have taken the buyout offer when you had the chance. Now, you lose the bridge and you pay for it. I walked out of that room feeling the weight of their stares. They thought they had won. They thought they had crushed the little guy. I drove home in a fog of rage. Sarah was waiting up for me, holding a glass of wine. They voted to demo it, didn't they? She asked. Tomorrow morning, I said, my voice hoarse. What do? We fight, I said, but not in their kangaroo court. That night, I didn't sleep. I drafted an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order, TRO. I'm an engineer, not a lawyer, but I know how to follow a template. I attached the original deed, the survey maps, and the inspector's original report saying the bridge was solid, which I had demanded a copy of earlier. I was at the county courthouse at 8 a.m. sharp. Just as Rick's bulldozers were staging at the end of my driveway, I could hear the diesel engines revving from miles away. It was a race against time. Judge Martinez was a no-nonsense man who had been on the bench for 20 years. He read my motion in silence. The clock on the wall ticked agonizingly slow. 8:15 a.m., 8:20 a.m. Mr. Morrison, the judge finally said, you claim this bridge is protected by a grandfather clause? Yes, Your Honor. And more importantly, the HOA has no jurisdiction over my property. They are attempting to destroy private property without due process. And what is this? The judge pointed to a specific paragraph. Water Management Authority? That, Your Honor, I said, is the reason the bridge exists. It houses the controls for the dam. The judge's eyebrows shot up. The dam controls? For the whole lake? Yes, sir. If they demolish that bridge, they risk destabilizing the entire water table. Judge Martinez signed the paper with a flourish. Injunction granted. Sheriff, get a deputy out there immediately. If anyone touches a stone on that bridge, I want them in irons. I called Linda from the courthouse steps. Call off your dogs, Linda. Excuse me? I have a court order. If Rick's bulldozer crosses my property line, he's going to jail. There was a long silence on the other end. Then a cold, venomous whisper. This isn't over, Jake. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. I will bury you in legal fees until you beg me to buy that cabin. She hung up. I stood there, holding the court order, feeling the adrenaline crash. I had won the battle, but the war was just beginning. And I knew that to win the war, I had to do more than just defend. I had to go on the offensive. I had to use the weapon my great-grandfather had left me. I drove to the county archives that afternoon. I needed to know exactly what Water Management Authority meant in 2024. What I found in the dusty basement of the Hall of Records made my jaw drop. It wasn't just about the bridge. The resort, Linda's precious $4 million paradise, had a fatal flaw, a vulnerability so massive, so overlooked, that it was almost comical, and I held the trigger. The courthouse victory was a band-aid on a bullet wound. Judge Martinez had given me 30 days. 30 days before the next hearing. 30 days before Linda's high-priced lawyers found a loophole to bulldoze my heritage. Most people would have spent that month panicking. They would have started a GoFundMe or called a local news station to cry on camera. But I'm an engineer. Panic is inefficient. When a system is failing, you don't cry about it. You analyze the load-bearing structures, find weak points, and apply pressure until the whole thing comes down. I needed to know why Linda was so obsessed. Yes, she was a control freak, but the sheer ferocity of her attack, the fake inspections, the rezoning, the $15,000 threats, felt desperate. It felt like she was racing against a clock I couldn't see. I spent the first weekend of my reprieve in the county archives. If you've never been to Hall of Records, imagine a library that smells like vinegar and dead dreams. It's where the county buries its secrets. I wasn't looking for bridge permits anymore. I was looking for the resort development plan that Linda had pushed through the zoning board 3 years ago. It took me 6 hours of digging through mislabeled boxes, but finally, I found it. Volume 4, Lakeside Luxury Resort and Marina, Environmental and Hydrological Impact Study. It was a massive binder, thick as a phone book. I sat at a scratched wooden table under a flickering fluorescent light and started reading. The deeper I got, the more I realized the resort was a house of cards. It was an ambitious project. Floating docks, water-level dining decks, and a Venetian canal system that wound through the high-end condos. It was designed to look like Italy, but it was built on a Texas floodplain. As I scanned their hydrological assumptions, I actually laughed. They assumed a constant water level. They built their entire infrastructure based on the lake, staying exactly at the spillway height of 650 feet above sea level. They had zero tolerance for fluctuation. Then, I turned the page to the financing section. Because the resort had applied for county tax incentives, their bank loan documents were public record. I scanned the fine print of the $4 million construction loan, looking for leverage. And there, buried in paragraph 12, subsection C, I found a silver bullet. Collateral maintenance requirement and default triggers. The borrower must maintain the operational viability of the marina and waterfront amenities at all times. If the water level of Lake Morrison drops below 648 feet, 24 inches below spillway, for a period exceeding 72 hours, the waterfront assets shall be deemed non-performing, and the lender reserves a right to call the full value of the loan due immediately. I froze. I reread it 3 times to be sure. 648 feet. That was only 2 feet of water. The resort was leveraged to the hilt. If the lake dropped just 24 inches, their loan would default. They would go bankrupt overnight. Linda's entire empire, her status, her $1 million paradise, was hanging by a thread of water depth. I closed the binder. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of discovery. I went back to my great-grandfather's blueprints, the ones I'd saved from the attic. The secondary bypass channels, the ones controlled by the valves hidden inside the stone arches of my bridge, were designed to lower the lake level by exactly 3 feet to allow for dam maintenance during flood seasons. I did the math in my head. If I opened those bypass valves, I could drop the lake level by 30 inches in about 6 hours. I sat back in a hard wooden chair, the hum of the archive's air conditioner, sounding like a jet engine. I wasn't just fighting for a pile of rocks anymore. I was holding the detonator to a financial nuclear bomb. Linda had tried to destroy my home because it didn't look pretty. She had no idea that her entire development was built on water that I legally controlled. But knowing I had the weapon wasn't enough. I had to make sure the gun would actually fire. I drove home and walked straight out to the bridge. It was late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the water. I climbed down the steep embankment to the base of the stone arches, hacking away years of ivy and brambles. Hidden behind the overgrowth was a heavy steel plate, rusted to the color of dried blood. I pulled a wrench from my belt and set to work on the bolts. They fought me 80 years of oxidation, but eventually they groaned and gave way. I pulled the plate free. Behind it was a small, cramped chamber smelling of damp earth and iron. And there it was, a massive brass wheel green with age but intact, connected to a worm gear shaft that disappeared into the masonry. This was the trigger. I gave it a test tug. It wouldn't budge. Seized solid. I needed grease. I needed leverage. And I needed someone who knew the difference between breaking a valve and opening one. I called Frank Wilson. Frank is a retired dam operator who used to work for the Army Corps of Engineers. He's 70, smokes cheap cigars, and hates HOAs even more than I do because they once fined him for flying an American flag that was too large. Frank, I said, meeting him at the diner an hour later, I need you to teach me how to operate a 1923 gravity-fed bypass system. Frank looked at my blueprints, his eyes narrowing as he traced the lines with a callous finger. He whistled low. Morrison, your granddaddy was a genius. This is a dual gate system. If you open this, the water bypasses the main spillway and shoots out the lower creek bed. It's powerful stuff. Why do you want to open it? Routine maintenance, I said, sliding the deed across the table. I pointed to clause I'd highlighted. I need to inspect the lower stonework. Can't do that with the water level up. And according to this, as the dam operator, I have a duty to maintain the structure. If I don't test the valves, I'm technically negligent. Frank grinned, revealing gold-capped teeth. Negligent. Right. Well, we can't have that. If those valves are seized, that's a safety hazard. Exactly, I said. I'm just being a responsible property owner. Frank agreed to help me service the mechanism. We spent the next 3 nights working in the cramped chamber under the bridge. We used gallons of penetrating oil, wire brushes, and a 6-foot breaker bar. We worked under the cover of darkness, not because we were doing anything illegal, but because I didn't want to tip my hand. On the 3rd night, we felt it. A clunk, then a smooth rotation. The wheel turned. She's live, Frank whispered, wiping grease on a rag. You give that 3 full turns, and you're dumping 10,000 gallons a minute. We were ready. The weapon was loaded. Meanwhile, Linda was busy digging her own grave. She had started a smear campaign in the local paper. Local man threatens community safety. The headline screamed. She gave quotes about how I was unstable and anti-progress. She even convinced the sheriff to park a deputy car near my driveway for community peace. She was trying to intimidate me. She thought the police presence would scare me into submission. She didn't realize she was just providing official witnesses for what was about to happen. The timeline was set. The grand opening of the resort was scheduled for next Saturday. Linda had invited investors from Dallas, the mayor, and the press. They had sold tickets for a gala on the water, a black-tie dinner on the floating docks. I looked at the calendar. It was Tuesday. If I opened the valves on Wednesday morning, the water would drop 30 inches by Wednesday night. The docks would be sitting in mud by Thursday. The loan default clause would trigger by Sunday. It was perfect. The timing was almost poetic. But I'm a fair man. I truly am. I didn't want to ruin the innocent employees at the resort or destroy the investment if I didn't have to. I decided to give Linda one last chance. One final opportunity to back down, leave my bridge alone, and act like a human being. I drafted an email to the HOA board. I made it polite, professional, and clear. Subject: final offer for resolution regarding Morrison property. I am willing to drop my countersuit and allow architectural review of future structures if the HOA permanently rescinds the demolition order for the existing bridge and acknowledges the grandfather status of my property. Let's resolve this like neighbors. I hit send and waited. Linda replied within 10 minutes. She didn't even consult the board. Response: the only resolution we will accept is your demolition plan. We have already scheduled the contractors for the day after your injunction expires. See you in court. She chose war. She thought she was calling my bluff. She thought I was just a guy with a crumbling bridge and a drained bank account. She didn't know I had the blueprints. She didn't know about the loan. I stood up from my desk and walked to the window. I looked out at the lake, shimmering under the moonlight. It was beautiful. It was powerful. And tomorrow, it was going to move. Okay, Linda, I said to the empty room. You want the water? You can have the water. All of it. I called Frank. We go at dawn. Copy that. Frank said, I'll bring the coffee. The trap was sprung. Tomorrow, Linda Prescott was going to learn a very expensive lesson in fluid dynamics. Wednesday morning arrived with a sky so blue it looked painted. It was a kind of crisp, golden morning that usually signals the start of a perfect Texas summer day. For the Whispering Pines Resort, however, it was the beginning of the end. I woke up at 5 a.m., not to an alarm, but to the hum of adrenaline. I dressed with the precision of a soldier. Steel-toed boots, heavy canvas work pants, and, most importantly, a neon yellow high-visibility safety vest. I clipped a hard hat to my belt and grabbed a clipboard loaded with my permits, the deed, and the maintenance logs. Perception is reality. If you show up in a hoodie with a crowbar, you're a vandal. If you show up in a safety vest with a clipboard, you're an official. Frank met me at the bridge at 6:30 a.m. He was already setting up orange safety cones and stringing yellow caution tape across the access path down to the water. He had a cigar clamped between his teeth, unlit, and a look of grim satisfaction on his face. "You ready to make some waves, kid?" Frank asked, patting a heavy canvas tool bag. "Born ready," I said, checking my watch. "Let's make sure everything is by the book. I don't want to give them an inch of legal wiggle room." We set up a large sandwich board sign right next to the road. "Caution, dam maintenance in progress. Water levels may fluctuate. Authorized personnel only." At 7 a.m. sharp, Linda's white BMW rolled past on her way to her morning Pilates class. She slowed down as she saw the cones, her window sliding down with a mechanical whir. "What do you think you're doing?" she shrieked, her voice shattering the morning peace. "You can't do construction. We have a restraining order against altering the bridge." I didn't even look up from my clipboard. "This isn't construction, Linda." I called back, my voice calm and projecting. "This is maintenance. Federal water rights require annual testing of the secondary bypass valves. Just doing my job." "I'm calling the sheriff," she yelled, her face flushing red. "I'm not letting you ruin the view for the gala." "Call him." Frank chuckled, leaning on a shovel. "Sheriff can't stop a federal mandate. Tell him to bring donuts." Linda peeled out, spraying gravel everywhere, her tires screeching like a banshee. I watched her go. She had no idea that she was driving away from a lake that was about to disappear. By 8 a.m., Sheriff Martinez arrived. He stepped out of his cruiser, adjusting his belt, looking tired. He'd been dealing with Linda's calls for weeks. "Jake," he sighed, taking off his sunglasses. "Linda says you're planning explosives. Please tell me you're not planning explosives." "No explosives, Sheriff. Just gravity." I handed him the clipboard. Clause 4, Section B of the deed. "The operator shall conduct annual flow tests of the bypass channels to ensure flood readiness. If I don't open these valves and we get a flood, I'm liable. I'm just following the law." The sheriff read the document, scratched his chin, and looked at the caution tape. He looked at Frank, who gave him a salute. "It checks out," Martinez said. "Safety first. You need me to stick around for traffic control?" "Might be a good idea," I said. Linda seemed pretty upset. "I'll park up on the ridge," he nodded. "Carry on." That was the green light. I nodded to Frank. We climbed down the steep embankment into the cool shadow of the limestone arches. The smell of damp earth and old stone surrounded us. We squeezed into the valve chamber. I placed my hands on the cold brass wheel. It was heavy, solid. It felt like shaking hands with history. My great-grandfather had stood right here, turning the same wheel. 3 turns clockwise, Frank instructed, his voice echoing in the small space. "Slow and steady. Don't shock the system." I heaved. The wheel groaned, a deep, metallic complaint of metal waking up after a long sleep. Then, a shudder ran through the stone beneath my boots. Deep inside the bowels of the bridge, the massive iron sluice gate was lifting. Rumble. It started as a vibration in my chest, then grew into a roar. A jet of white water shot out from the base of the bridge into the overflow creek bed. It was magnificent. The power of millions of gallons of water obeying simple physics. The creek, dry for years, suddenly surged with life, the water frothing and churning as it raced downstream, bypassing the main dam entirely. Flow is stable. Frank yelled over the noise. "She's wide open." We climbed back up to the road, dusting off our hands. You couldn't see the difference in the lake yet. It's a big body of water, but the math had begun. We were draining 10,000 gallons a minute. By noon, the water level had dropped 6 inches. That might not sound like much, but on a shallow shoreline, 6 inches is a lot of horizontal distance. The water was pulling away from the bank. By 3 p.m., it was down 12 inches. That's when the panic started. I was sitting on my porch, eating a sandwich, when my phone rang. It was an unknown number. Mr. Morrison? A frantic voice. This is Jim, the dock master at the resort marina. Listen, I don't know what's happening, but the water is dropping fast. The boat ramps are getting too steep. My floating docks are starting to ground out. You have to stop whatever you're doing. I'm sorry, Jim, I said, keeping my voice professionally detached. The test protocol requires a full cycle. 24 hours open to flush the sediment. It's a safety requirement. 24 hours. Jim sounded like he was going to cry. Sir, we have a regatta this weekend. By tomorrow morning, the marina will be sitting on mud. We have $1 million boats that are going to be beached. You should have built longer ramps, I said. Or maybe check the water rights before building a marina on a controlled flood reservoir. I hung up. I felt a pang of sympathy for Jim. He was just a guy doing a job. But he was collateral damage in a war Linda started. At 5 p.m., Linda showed up again. This time, the sheriff stopped her at the property line. I walked down to meet her. She wasn't screaming anymore. She was pale. She had figured it out. She had probably gotten a hysterical call from the bank or the resort investors. Jake, she said, her voice trembling. Please, stop the water. We can work something out. Work something out? I took a sip of my iced tea. Like a demolition plan? Like the $15,000 fine you tried to levy yesterday? We'll drop the fines, she said quickly, her eyes darting to the receding shoreline. I'll talk to the board. We'll let you keep the bridge. Just close the valves. The bank, the loan. She trailed off. She knew that I knew. I need that in writing. I said coldly. Notarize. And I want a formal public apology read at the next board meeting, admitting that the HOA overstepped its bounds and harassed my family. I can't do that, she snapped, her old arrogance flaring up even in her desperation. It would humiliate me. The investors are watching. Then the water runs. I said, it's physics, Linda. Gravity doesn't care about your pride. And neither do I. She stormed off, pulling her phone out to scream at some poor lawyer. She thought she could still bluff me. She thought I would crack under the pressure of ruining the weekend. She didn't realize I was counting down the inches. By sunset, the lake was down 18 inches. I walked down to the shoreline with Sarah. The smell of drying algae and wet mud began to fill the air. To most people, it would smell like a swamp. To me, it smelled like victory. We looked across the lake at the resort. The lights of the lakeside bistro flickered on, illuminating nothing. The water had receded so far that the underwater ambience lights were now exposing the ugly concrete pilings, old tires, and trash that had sunk to the bottom over the years. The Venetian canals were turning into Venetian mud pits. A $200,000 wakeboard boat was listing dangerously to the side, its hull grinding against the rocks as the water vanished beneath it. I saw staff members running around with garden hoses, spraying water into the marina basin, as if that would make a difference. It was pathetic. It was man fighting nature with a squirt gun. You really did it, Sarah whispered, squeezing my hand. They're ruined. Not yet, I said, checking my watch. They have until Sunday for the loan default. But the gala? That's dead in the water. I slept like a baby that night. The sound of the rushing water from the creek was a lullaby. I dreamed of bulldozers sinking into the mud. But the next morning, Thursday, would bring the real fireworks. Because when money is threatened, the sharks start circling. And Linda was about to find out that she wasn't the biggest shark in the tank. Thursday morning broke with a silence that felt heavy, almost suffocating. The usual sound of the lake, the slap of water against the bulkheads, the hum of trolling motors, were gone. In their place was the wet, sucking sound of mud drying in the Texas heat and the frantic shouting of resort staff trying to salvage a disaster. I walked out to my dock with a cup of coffee. Or rather, I walked out to where the water used to be. The lake level was now down 28 inches. The scene across the water was apocalyptic. The lakeside luxury resort looked like a shipwreck graveyard. The floating docks, designed to rise and fall with gentle fluctuations, hadn't been built for a 3-foot drop. They were twisted at severe angles, snapping their moorings and resting unevenly on the rocky lake bed. A 60-foot party barge, The centerpiece of the upcoming gala was high and dry, listing at a 45-degree angle, his propeller exposed to the air like a dead fish. The Venetian canals that wound through the high-end condos were now trenches of brown sludge. The smell was intense, a mixture of rotting algae, dead mussels, and the sharp tang of exposed silt. To the resort guests, it was the smell of a ruined vacation. To me, it was a smell of absolute, undeniable victory. I checked the time. 9 a.m. I went to the bridge to check the valves. Frank was already there, leaning against his truck, watching the resort through a pair of binoculars. "You see that?" Frank asked, pointing toward the resort's main entrance. "The vultures are circling." I took the binoculars. 3 black Chevrolet Suburbans with tinted windows were pulling into the resort's VIP parking lot. Men in sharp charcoal suits stepped out. They weren't tourists. They weren't construction workers. They walked with a stiff, predatory gait of risk management officers. The bank had arrived. The clause in the loan agreement was specific. If the water level dropped below the threshold, the asset was considered impaired, and the bank had the right to inspect immediately. I watched as Linda ran out of the lobby to meet them. Even from this distance, I could see the panic in her body language. She was waving her arms, pointing at the bridge, then pointing at the sky, probably blaming the weather, me, or God himself. The lead banker didn't look at the sky. He walked straight to the edge of the retaining wall, looked down at the mud where the water should have been, and checked his watch. He pulled out a phone. That phone call was the execution order for Linda's empire. An hour later, my phone rang. I expected it. It wasn't Linda. She was likely currently being flayed alive by the financial officers. It was Mr. Blackstone, her high-priced attorney from Dallas. Mr. Morrison. His voice was oily tight and lacked the arrogance it possessed 2 days ago. "We are prepared to offer a cease and desist regarding the bridge demolition. In exchange, we request, nay, we demand the immediate cessation of water release." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Mr. Blackstone." "Excuse me? You are causing millions of dollars in damages." "I'm an engineer, sir. You're familiar with the concept of a water hammer?" I lied smoothly. "If I close a high-pressure gravity valve too quickly after it's been open for 24 hours, the hydraulic shock wave could shatter the original 1923 piping. It could blow the dam." "Blow the?" He stuttered. "Safety protocol requires a gradual step-down procedure." I continued, making up the timeline as I went. "I need at least another 12 hours to slowly reduce the pressure without risking catastrophic structural failure. I can't close it until tomorrow morning." 12 hours will bankrupt my client," he shouted, his composure cracking. "The bank has already issued a notice of default. They need the water back now." "That sounds like a poor financial strategy on their part." I replied calmly. "Maybe they should have checked the water rights before building a marina on a controlled flood reservoir." "Oh, and Mr. Blackstone." "What?" he snapped. "Tell your client that her brother-in-law's landscaping trucks are blocking my driveway again. If they aren't moved in 10 minutes, I'm having them towed. Have a nice day." I hung up. The trap hadn't just sprung. It had snapped shut on their necks. But I underestimated Linda. I assumed that faced with total defeat, she would crumble. I forgot that a cornered animal doesn't crumble. It bites. That afternoon, around 4 p.m., my phone buzzed again. It was Tom Rodriguez, the resort maintenance worker who Linda had tried to bribe earlier. He was whispering, Jake, you gotta get to the bridge. Now!" "What's going on, Tom?" "Linda, she's lost it. She hired some guys from out of town. Shady guys. They just pulled up with an oxyacetylene torch rig. She told them to seal the breach." My blood ran cold. "She's gonna weld the valve shut?" "She says she's saving the community. She's screaming about being a hero. Jake, they're walking down the embankment now." "I'm on my way." I grabbed my keys and sprinted to my truck. This wasn't a civil dispute anymore. Tampering with flood control infrastructure is a federal felony. If they welded those valves shut, they could permanently damage the dam or prevent us from managing a real flood, putting lives at risk. I sped down the road, gravel flying. When I screeched to a halt at the bridge, the scene was chaotic. 2 men in unmarked gray coveralls were dragging heavy gas tanks down the slope. Linda was standing at the top of the embankment, looking disheveled. Her hair was a mess. Her expensive blouse was stained with sweat, and her eyes were wide and manic. Cut it, she was screaming at the men. Melt the wheel. Weld it to the housing. I don't care what it takes. Stop the water. Hey! I yelled, slamming my truck door and sprinting toward them. Get away from that valve. The two workers looked up. They saw me, a big guy in work boots charging at them, and they hesitated. One of them held a lit torch, the blue flame hissing in the quiet air. Lady, the guy with the torch said, looking nervous, you didn't say the owner was here. He's not the owner. Linda screeched, pointing a shaking finger at me. He's a domestic terrorist. He's destroying our property. Do it. I'll pay you double. I stopped 10 feet away, pulling out my phone and holding it up to record. Gentlemen, listen to me very carefully. You are standing on a federally protected flood control structure. If you touch that valve with a torch, you are committing a felony. 10 years in federal prison. Is she paying you enough of that? The worker looked at me, then at the dam, then at Linda. He turned the knob on his torch, extinguishing the flame with a pop. I'm out, he said, shaking his head. I ain't go to Leavenworth for your HOA drama, lady. Pack it up, Mike. No. Linda lunged forward, grabbing the worker's arm. You work for me. I command you to seal it. Get off me. The worker shoved her away and started hauling his gear up the hill. Linda stood there, panting, watching her last hope walk away. Then she turned to me. The look in her eyes wasn't human. It was pure, distilled hatred. You, she whispered. You ruined everything. My house, the resort, my reputation. You took it all. You did this to yourself, Linda. I said, keeping the camera steady. All you had to do was leave the bridge alone. I am the president, she screamed, lunging at me. It happened fast, but in slow motion. She charged me, claws out. I didn't hit her. I knew better than that. I just stepped back, but she was frantic. She grabbed my shirt, ripping the collar, and slapped me. Crack. It was a solid hit. My cheek stung, and I tasted a bit of blood where my tooth cut my lip. Silence fell over the scene. The workers stopped loading their truck. Frank, who had just pulled up, stood frozen by his car. You struck me, I said, my voice dangerously calm. That is assault. I'll do it again, she shrieked, raising her hand. I'll kill you. I'll. Mrs. Prescott. A booming voice cut through the air. We all looked up to the road. Sheriff Martinez had stepped out of his cruiser. He had been parked on the ridge, watching the whole time. He walked down the embankment slowly, his hand resting on his handcuffs. He looked sad, like a parent watching a toddler melt down, but his eyes were hard. Sheriff, Linda yelled, pointing at me. Arrest him. He's sabotaging the water. Ma'am, Martinez said, stepping between us. I just watched you attempt to damage public infrastructure, and then I watched you assault Mr. Morrison on video. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Linda froze. What? You are under arrest, Martinez said, pulling her wrist behind her. You can't arrest me, she wailed, the reality finally piercing her delusion. I'm the HOA president. I have a gala this weekend. Do you know who my husband is? I know your husband is currently under investigation for contractor fraud, ma'am, the sheriff said, clicking the cuffs shut. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it. I watched as he marched her up the hill. She was sobbing now, messy, ugly tears of a bully who had finally been punched back by the universe. He guided her into the back of the cruiser, her head ducking to avoid the frame. The welders peeled out, disappearing down the road. Frank walked down to me, looking at my torn shirt. You okay, kid? Never better, Frank, I said, wiping the blood from my lip. We looked at the bridge. The water was still rushing through the bypass, a steady, powerful roar. The lake was ruined. The resort was bankrupt. Linda was in handcuffs. So, Frank asked, lighting a cigar, when do we close the valves? I looked at the water, then back at the sheriff's cruiser driving away with the flashing lights reflecting off the mud. Mr. Blackstone said he needed water. I smiled. But I told him safety requires a gradual shutdown. Let's give it another 6 hours, just to be safe. The trap had worked perfectly, but the war wasn't over. Linda was gone, but the wreckage she left behind and the vacuum of power in the community meant that the final cleanup was just beginning, and I intended to scrub this town clean. with Linda in the back of Sheriff Martinez's cruiser, the flashing lights reflecting off the muddy corpse of the lake. The resistance didn't just crumble, it evaporated. The welders packed their gear in record time, peeling out the driveway like they were escaping a crime scene, which, technically, they were. The silence that followed was heavy. The only sound was the roar of the water still rushing through the bypass channels beneath my feet. Well, Frank said, spitting a piece of tobacco on the ground. That was eventful. You could say that. I replied, my cheek still throbbing where Linda had slapped me. You think she's going to make bail? With an assault on a federal witness and attempted sabotage of public infrastructure? Frank laughed darkly. She might make bail, but she's never going to show her face at a potluck again. We stood there for a moment, watching the water churn. The lake was down nearly 36 inches now. The shoreline had receded 50 feet in some places. The resort was a wasteland of mud, stranded boats, and broken dreams. The maintenance cycle had done its job. I had flushed the sediment, tested the mechanicals, and utterly destroyed my enemy's financial leverage. All right, Frank, I sighed, the adrenaline finally leaving my system and leaving me exhausted. Let's close her up. The point has been made. It took us an hour to crank the massive brass wheel back into the closed position. The mechanism falls a bit more on the way back. Gravity is easier to work with than against, but eventually the sluice gate slammed shut with a final, satisfying thud. The roar of the water faded, replaced by the trickle of the creek and the distant hum of crickets. The silence was absolute. The next morning, Friday, the real dam broke. Not the concrete one holding back the water, but the dam of silence, fear, and politeness that held this community hostage for 2 years. It started with the signs. I drove past the resort entrance at 8 a.m. The grand opening gala banner, which had been proudly displayed between 2 marble pillars, was gone. In its place was a chain link fence and a small white sign that screamed failure in bold red letters. Property seized by regional bank and no trespassing. The bank hadn't waited until Sunday. Once the water hit the critical low mark and the impaired asset clause triggered, they moved with the speed of a striking cobra. They locked the doors, fired the staff, and secured the site. The resort was dead. But the biggest explosion happened that evening. News of Linda's arrest and the resort's collapse spread through the neighborhood WhatsApp groups like wildfire. The silent majority, the neighbors who had kept their heads down, paid their fines, and feared Linda's wrath, finally woke up. They realized the emperor wasn't just naked. She was in handcuffs. A special emergency meeting was called at the community center. This time, Linda wasn't there to preside. She was out on bail. But the judge had slapped her with a no-contact order regarding me and a restriction from attending any HOA functions pending trial. Her husband, Rick, tried to take the stage. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. His polo shirt was wrinkled, and his arrogance was replaced by a twitchy desperation. Now, everyone, settle down. Rick shouted into the microphone. This is all a misunderstanding. Linda is a victim here. We need to rally together to sue Mr. Morrison for the water damage. The room was packed, and for the first time, it wasn't just Linda's cronies. It was everyone. The fishermen, the retirees, the young families. Then Mrs. Chun stood up. Mrs. Chun is 5'0", 80 years old, and usually brings cookies to the meetings. Tonight, she brought a stack of paper. "Sit down, Rick," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise like a knife. "Excuse me?" Rick blinked. "I am the acting president." "You are a fraud," Mrs. Chin said, walking to the front of the room. She placed the papers on the projector table. After Jake told me about the licensing issues, I did some digging into the treasurer's reports. I have a nephew who is a forensic accountant. The room went deathly silent. "This," she pointed to a projection on the wall, "is a transfer of $40,000 from our reserve fund to Eagle Eye Protection for consulting services." "Rick, isn't that your company?" "That was for security assessments." Rick stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "And this," she flipped the page, "is a $15,000 payment to Prescott Legal Defense Fund made yesterday morning. You used our HOA dues to pay for your wife's bail lawyer." The room exploded. It wasn't a meeting anymore. It was a revolution. People were shouting, demanding answers. The veil had been lifted. They realized they hadn't been paying for community upkeep. They had been funding the Prescott family's personal piggy bank. "I move for an immediate vote of no confidence," shouted Mr. Patterson, the baker who had previously shunned Sarah. "Seconded," yelled half the room. Rick tried to argue, but he was drowned out. The vote was unanimous. The entire board, Rick, the treasurer, the secretary, was recalled on the spot. They were fired. A new interim board was elected right there amidst the chaos. Mrs. Chun was named president. Tom Rodriguez, the maintenance worker who had warned me about the welding torch, was named vice president. Mrs. Chun took the microphone. She looked at Rick, who was shrinking into his chair. "Rick, I suggest you leave. And take your security team with you. We will be contacting the district attorney regarding the embezzlement of funds." Rick fled the building to a chorus of boos. Mrs. Chun then turned to the crowd. She adjusted her glasses and looked straight at me, sitting in the back row. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "the new board has a first order of business." I stood up, feeling the eyes of the room on me. "I move to immediately dissolve the Architectural Control Committee's demolition order for the Morrison Bridge," Mrs. Chin announced. "And furthermore, I move to designate the bridge as a protected community historic landmark, exempt from all future HOA modifications." All in favor? Every hand in the room went up. Even the people who had voted against me a week ago. They knew which way the wind was blowing, and they wanted to be on the winning side. "Motion passes," Mrs. Chin smiled. I walked out of that meeting into the cool night air. The stars were bright above the Texas Hill Country. The lake was low, ugly, and smelled of mud. But for the first time in 2 years, the air didn't smell like oppression. It smelled like freedom. I drove home slowly, my headlights cutting to the dark. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw the bridge. It stood there, silhouetted against the moon, rugged, stone, unmovable. It had survived floods, droughts, and now, Linda Prescott. Sarah met me at the door. "How did it go?" "Rick is out," I said, kissing her forehead. "Mrs. Chun is in. The bridge is safe." "And Linda?" "Linda is going to be busy for a very long time," I said. "Between the criminal charges, the investor lawsuits, and the embezzlement investigation, she's done." The next few days were a blur of vindication. The investors who lost their money in the resort turned on Linda with the ferocity of starving wolves. They sued her for fraud, misrepresentation, and breach of fiduciary duty. They went after her personal assets. I sat on my dock on Sunday morning. The water was still low. It would take months of rain to refill the lake naturally, but I didn't mind. I watched a blue heron pick a fish out of a shallow pool in the mud. The resort across the way was silent. No construction noise. No entitlement. Just an empty shell of a building that had tried to fight nature and lost. The dam had broken. All right, Linda's wall of lies, intimidation, and money had crumbled under the weight of the truth. And all it took was a little bit of leverage, a little bit of courage, and a whole lot of water. But the cleanup wasn't over yet. The villains were gone, but they left a mess behind. And strangely enough, the bank wasn't done with me either. They had a distressed asset, a half-finished resort with no water guarantee. And they needed to make a deal. It turns out, being the water lord of Lake Morrison came with some interesting business opportunities. The aftermath of the water war was messy, complex, and for me, deeply satisfying. In engineering, we talk about structural failure, when a load exceeds the capacity of material, leading to a collapse. Linda Prescott experienced a structural failure of her life, and it happened with breathtaking speed. Linda probably thought the criminal charges were the worst part. The assault charge, the attempted sabotage, the disorderly conduct, those were embarrassing. She ended up taking a plea deal. 2 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, which the judge, in a moment of poetic justice, mandated be served picking up trash along the county roads. She used to patrol like a dictator, and mandatory anger management classes. But the criminal courts move slow. The financial markets move fast. And the real pain wasn't the handcuffs. It was a liquidation. The resort investors were not the kind of people who shrug off a $4 million loss. These were hard-nosed Dallas equity firms. When the bank foreclosed on a resort because of the water level clause, the investors lost their equity. They were furious. And they were looking for a scapegoat. They found Linda. They filed a massive civil suit alleging fraud, misrepresentation, and breach of fiduciary duty. They argued that Linda had failed to disclose the existence of my water rights that were a matter of public record, during the due diligence phase. They argued she had recklessly endangered the investment by antagonizing the dam operator, me. Simultaneously, Mrs. Chun and the new HOA board filed their own suit. They went after Linda and Rick for embezzlement and misuse of funds. Because Linda had used HOA money to pay for her personal legal defense and Rick's unlicensed security firm, the judge allowed them to pierce the corporate veil. That's a fancy legal term that means Linda couldn't hide behind an LLC. Her personal assets were now fair game. 2 months after the dam break, I was drinking coffee on my porch when a flatbed tow truck pulled up to the Prescott McMansion across the lake. It wasn't a discreet operation. It was a repo job. I watched through my binoculars as the driver hooked up the pristine white BMW SUV. Linda came running out of the house, screaming, waving papers. The driver didn't even look at her. He just winched it up, secured the chains, and drove off. A week later, the for sale sign went up on her lawn. Not a standard realtor sign, but a notice of foreclosure auction. The bank had come for the house to satisfy the judgments against her. It was a total liquidation of her status. The car, the house, the club memberships, the reputation, all stripped away layer by layer. Rick didn't fare much better. The state licensing board doesn't play around with contractor fraud. He was hit with $50,000 in fines for operating an unlicensed security firm and performing construction work without a permit. He was permanently banned from holding a contractor's license in the state of Texas. They moved away about 6 months later. I heard through the grapevine they headed to Arizona to live in a condo rented by Linda's sister. I pitied the HOA in that condo complex. With the villains vanquished, the neighborhood began to heal, but there was still a massive, mud-caked elephant in the room: the resort. The lakeside luxury resort sat empty for 4 months. It was a ghost town. The windows were dark, the landscaping was dying, and the Venetian canals were dry concrete ditches. It was an eyesore, a monument to greed. Then the phone rang. It was the vice president of the regional bank that now owned the property. Mr. Morrison. His voice was respectful, almost deferential. "We have a situation." "I know," I said. "You have a distressed asset." "We have a dead asset," he corrected. "We've been trying to offload the property for months. But every time a potential buyer runs a title search, they see the water rights deed attached to your property. No one will touch a marina resort if they can't guarantee water." "That seems like a smart business decision," I said. "Mr. Morrison," he sighed, "we need to make a deal. We can't let this property rot. It destroys property values for the whole area, including yours." He was right. I didn't want a ruin across the lake. I wanted neighbors. "I'm listening," I said. "We have a buyer," the banker continued. "It's not a luxury chain. It's a group that specializes in eco-tourism and state park lodges. They want to convert the property. No jet skis, no loud parties, no Venetian nonsense. They want to turn it into a fishing and hiking lodge. Low impact sustainable." My ears perked up. That sounds better. "They are willing to buy the property, but only if you sign a water management agreement. They need a guarantee that you won't drain the lake during their peak season." "I'm willing to talk," I said, "but I have conditions." The meeting took place on my bridge. I made the bankers and the new buyers, a group of guys in flannel shirts and hiking boots, walk down to the water with me. The lead buyer, a guy named David, looked at the limestone arches and smiled. "This is beautiful stonework, Mr. Morrison. We'd love to incorporate this history into the lodge's branding." We hammered out a deal right there on the bridge my great-grandfather built. Water stability. I agreed to maintain lake levels within a standard operating range during the summer season, barring flood emergencies or necessary structural maintenance. The Conservation Trust. In exchange for the water guarantee, the lodge would pay 2% of their annual gross revenue into a Lake Morrison Conservation Trust. This money would be used to stock fish, clean the shoreline, and maintain the dam and bridge. Community access. The lodge would open its hiking trails and fishing piers to local residents for free. No more exclusive gates. David shook my hand. "We're going to call it the Old Stone Lodge, and we'd like to name the dining hall after Samuel Morrison." I looked at the water, which was slowly rising back up as the spring rains began to fill the basin. "He like that," I said. The lodge opened a year later. It was everything Linda's resort wasn't. It was quiet, respectful of the land, and blended into the trees rather than bulldozing them. The Venetian canals were filled in and turned into native wildflower gardens. The marina was scaled back to a few fishing boats and kayaks. It was perfect. It was exactly what the community needed. And the best part? The property values didn't tank. They went up. It turns out people prefer living next to a quiet, well-managed nature lodge rather than a loud, exclusive party resort. I used my portion of the settlement money from the initial lawsuits to do something I'd wanted to do for 20 years. I hired a specialized masonry team, real artisans, to restore the bridge. We repointed the mortar, steam cleaned the limestone, and installed discreet lighting to highlight the arches at night. The County Historical Society came out for a rededication ceremony. Mrs. Chun, now the beloved president of the HOA, cut the ribbon. "This bridge," she told the crowd, "is more than just a way to get across the water. It is a symbol of our community's resilience. It reminds us that history matters, and that standing up for what is right is never a waste of time." I stood in the back, holding Sarah's hand, watching the neighbors celebrate. The bridge looked brand new, golden in the afternoon sun. The war was over. The water was back. And the total liquidation of the old regime had paved the way for something that actually felt like home. But as I looked at the crowd, I realized something. This wasn't just about me winning. It was about what happens when you strip away the artifice, the bylaws, and the power trips. When you get down to the bedrock, the stone and the water, you find out who people really are. Linda was gone, but her lesson remained. A lesson I would carry with me, and one that I would make sure every future developer, HOA president, or petty tyrant understood before they set foot in our valley. I walked over to the edge of the bridge and looked down at the water. It was calm, reflecting the sky. Deep beneath the surface, the brass valves were greased, sealed, and waiting, just in case. It's been 2 years since the great draining. 2 years since I turned a brass wheel, flushed 1,000,000 gallons of water, and washed away a tyrant. The lake is full again. Nature is resilient like that. The scars on the shoreline where the mud lay exposed for months have healed over, covered in lush, native sawgrass and wildflowers. The water is glassy and calm, reflecting the Texas sky in a way that makes you forget the chaos that happened here. I'm sitting on my dock, watching the sunrise. The air smells of brewing coffee and pine needles. No diesel fumes, no construction noise, and definitely no desperation. A blue heron takes flight near the marsh, its wings creating ripples that travel all the way to the other side. I hear a truck pulling up the gravel drive. It's a new Ford F-150, branded with the logo, the Old Stone Lodge, State Park and Nature Reserve. Tom Rodriguez hops out. He's not the nervous, overworked maintenance guy who is terrified of losing his job anymore. He's the head of facilities for the new lodge. He walks with a bounce in his step, wearing a clean uniform and a smile that reaches his eyes. "Morning, Jake," he waves, walking down to the dock. "Just checking to where levels upstream. You seeing good flow on your end?" Steady as a rock, Tom. I wave back. "How's the occupancy this weekend?" "Booked solid," Tom grins. "We got a fly fishing retreat coming in from Austin and a bird watching group from Houston. And the best part? They're quiet. They're in bed by 10 p.m. We laugh. It's a different world. The new lodge employs more locals than Linda's resort ever did. And because they treat their staff like human beings, the turnover is non-existent. Tom just bought his first house last month, a nice ranch style 3 miles down the road. He couldn't have done that on the wages Linda was paying. Sarah walks out onto the porch, the screen door slamming shut with a familiar thwack. She's holding a bundle in her arms. "Say good morning to your dad," she coos. I walk up and take my son, Samuel, into my arms. He's 6 months old, named after the man who built the bridge that saved our home. He has blue eyes and a grip like a vice. "You know," Sarah says, leaning her head on my shoulder as we look out the water, "you really went nuclear on them back then." "I just performed necessary maintenance," I say with a grin. "It was a safety requirement." "You drained a lake, Jake." Details. I kiss her forehead. We walk down to the bridge together. It looks better than it has in 50 years. The restoration team did incredible work. The limestone glows golden in the morning light. The mortar is fresh and strong, and the ivy has been trimmed back to show off the craftsmanship. Right at the center of the arch, there's a bronze plaque that the County Historical Society installed last year. It reads, The Morrison Bridge, established 1923, designated historic landmark built on rock, protected by water, preserved by family. I traced the letters with my finger. My great-grandfather built this to move logs and control floods. He never could have imagined that a century later, it would be the fortress that protected his legacy from a corrupt HOA. The community has changed, too. Mrs. Chun is still the HOA president. The meetings are boring now, mostly discussions about which native fish to stock in the lake or organizing the annual Bridge Day potluck. We don't talk about fines. We don't measure grass with rulers. We talk like neighbors. We even have a new rule in the bylaws, written by yours truly and voted in unanimously. No HOA funds shall be used for legal action against residents without a 90% supermajority vote of the entire community. That effectively ended the era of the HOA lawsuit bully forever. I become something of a local legend, which is embarrassing but useful. People call me when they have water rights issues. I've helped 3 other property owners in the county dig up old deeds and fight back against developers trying to steamroll them. It turns out there are a lot of forgotten rights buried in dusty basements, just waiting for someone to read the fine print. One afternoon, a young engineering student from Texas A&M came by to interview me for her thesis on historical water law and modern development. Mr. Morrison, she asked, recording on her phone, if you could give one piece of advice to someone facing a situation like yours, a giant corporation or a tyrannical board, what would it be? I looked at the bridge, then down at the water flowing peacefully through the bypass channels. I'd tell them that physics and history are the only 2 things that don't lie. I said, bullies rely on fear. They rely on you not knowing the rules. They rely on you thinking they have all the power because they have the loudest voices and the most expensive suits. I paused, thinking of Linda in her white BMW, screaming at the welder. But power isn't about noise, I continued. Real power is understanding the foundation you're standing on. It's reading the deed. It's knowing the flow rate. And sometimes real power is having the patience to wait until they build their castle on sand, and then simply turning the wheel. Linda Prescott is a distant memory now. A cautionary tale told at the local bar. Don't pull a Prescott, they say when someone gets too bossy. But the bridge remains. It connects the east bank to the west. It connects the past to the future. And most importantly, it connects my son to his history. Someday, when Sam is old enough, I'll take him down into the damp, cool chamber beneath the stone arches. I'll show him the brass wheel, cleaned and greased and ready. I'll teach him how to read the water levels. I'll teach him that we are the guardians of this place. And I'll teach him the most important lesson of all. Never start a fight with an engineer who knows where the plumbing goes. I look out one last time at the sparkling water of Lake Morrison. The old Stone Lodge guests are launching kayaks. Fishermen are casting lines. The world is as it should be. My name is Jake Morrison. I fought the law, the money, and the HOA. And I won. Thanks for listening to the story of how I drowned a corrupt HOA in their own greed. It was a long fight, but every time I walk across that bridge, I know it was worth it. If you're currently dealing with a nightmare HOA, or if you have a neighbor who thinks they own the neighborhood, remember, knowledge is power. Check your local property codes. Dig up your old deeds, and never assume they have the authority they claim to have. Drop a comment below. Have you ever discovered a forgotten right, or a loophole that saved your bacon? Or maybe you have an HOA horror story that needs to be told. I read every single comment, and I might feature the best ones in a future video. And if you like seeing a corrupt authority figure get absolutely dismantled by legal loopholes and malicious compliance, you are going to love the next story. It's about an elderly farmer named Martha, a corrupt city council that tried to seize her family farm through eminent domain to build a shopping mall, and the 100-year-old mineral rights clause that turned their construction site into a federally protected mining zone. Trust me, you don't want to miss that one. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay free and keep your powder dry.